Don Global presents the DG Recruit podcast on everything headhunting and recruitment. Achieve the life and career you envision. What's up, game changers? It's your host, Don, founder of Don Global, the headhunting and career coaching company helping you achieve the life and career you envision. I am so excited to interview Mike Williams today, the founder of Carnegie Search. I have met Mike a few years ago when I was trying to headhunt him, but unfortunately he was way too good and I knew he was probably going to start his own firm. A couple years later, of course, he made the leap and did that. So I'm so excited to hear more about your journey in recruitment, learn more about your business and your tips for our listeners.
Awesome. Well, it's fun to be here. Thank you for having me onto this thing. And so we've known each other for a while now. So I don't know, feels like maybe 3 or 4 or 5 years, somewhere in that range. Yes. I should go back actually and look onto the LinkedIn messages to see the first communication that we've had. But good to be here.
Awesome. Well, awesome to have you and excited to see your success already in such a quick time at starting your own recruitment agency. Out of curiosity, why did you name it Carnegie Search?
So the story there is I read this book called How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, which was a very influential book in my life. And I also just thought it sounded like a fancy type of name that people might like. But for me, when I read that book, it really flipped a switch in my mind because I read it when I was maybe like 22, 23 years old. I was just out of college. I had a degree in English that I didn't want to use because I didn't want to be a teacher and I didn't want to go back to school for grad school to get a master's or anything like that. And when I read that book, it just told me a lot about like, there are things that you can do to make yourself better at whatever path in life that you take. And that was like a type of energy I wanted to bring to the business was you can study things, and learn and grow and get better and constantly develop. And so that's what we try to do, every day is just get a little better at recruiting.
Awesome. Well, I asked you that because I had an inkling it was probably related to Andrew Carnegie, not Andrew Carnegie, Dale Carnegie. That was also a life-changing book for me. And I read it around the same age. And it really helped me be a very good recruiter. And I even had it on my desk. And then my director actually borrowed it. So I was like, it's kind of like a quest, that name Carnegie, for those who know, they're like, oh, we like that name. Like there's so many positive connotations. So I just thought that was hilarious. But anyway.
Yeah. And then he does like the seminars that they'll go around, like every once in a while, you'll see on someone's resume, it says like Dale Carnegie course certified or something. I'd love to do one of those someday, but I always tell people about that book. When I hired my first recruiter earlier this year, I gave him the book when we first, on his first day. And so that's the story there.
Love it. Well, how did you get into recruiting? So you mentioned you had an English degree. How did you end up in recruitment?
Yeah. So I had sort of always been in sales. So I had kind of a magnet pulling me in that direction anyways. When I was in college, I had a job called the Annual Fund. And the Annual Fund was actually a basement office of college cold callers, where what we would do was call on alumni and ask for money. Mm-hmm. So that was my introduction into sales. And I always liked that and thought that was fun. When I got out of college, I had a job. I worked at the same place for like 5-6 years. For the first year or two, I was doing like administrative stuff. And then they put me into sales. And then that was like a small family business that I was ready to move on after 5 years there. And the funny story of that was actually the way that I got that job was through a staffing agency. And that same agency had a job posted for a sales rep. So I was like, I kind of know these people, applied, interviewed, got the job. And that was that.
Got it. So you applied to the staffing company and then the staffing company ended up hiring you internally for that role.
Years later. Yeah. So they placed me somewhere else where I was for 5 years and then they ended up hiring me for internal. Yeah.
Got it. So what did you think about recruiting when you got into it? You're at this new job, you just made the pivot. What did you think about this business, this career?
I immediately liked it. I think that what stood out to me about it was a few things. One was how unregulated, I guess, if that's a word, that it was, because I was coming from a sales world that was like very compliance driven. And it was a lot of checks and balances, lawyers involved. And, when I got into recruiting, it was like, you would send out a one-page contract, they would sign it the same day, and you would start recruiting for that job. I was like, doesn't legal need to be involved with it? Are we allowed to do this? I was like, it should be against the law or something. But if you do it ethically, of course, it's all for everyone's best interest. But that stood out to me. I was feeling like it was kind of like the Wild West, which I really liked, because I'm someone who I don't like to be told what to do. I want to be able to go and make my own decisions. And there's a lot of freedom when you're running a full desk in recruitment. So that stood out to me. The other thing that stood out to me was I loved the pace of it. It's really fast paced. You could close a deal in a week, if you're lucky with a fast client. Probably could close a deal quicker than that, especially on the temp side. Sometimes they were closing them in an hour. But I liked that part of it a lot. I liked the potential to make money a lot. It became very clear, like in the first few weeks, like, wow, there's a huge earning potential if you can do this job well. And you're around other people who are big billers, and you're seeing them with, they're wearing Rolexes and they're driving in with Mercedes and BMWs, and they're young, and it's fun and exciting. And that all motivates you when you're, young, and I think I was 25 when I first started. So I was like, just felt like I was thrust into this world that was so different and unique and exciting. And then the last thing I would say that stood out to me was it seemed very straightforward type of a sales process, because where I was coming from in sales, it was a complex service that we were selling. So basically the type of cold call you would have to make was, this is who I am. This is who our company is. You've never heard of us. This is what we do. It's very hard to understand, but if you give me 5 minutes, I can explain it. This is what the pain point is. You probably have never felt it because you don't really know what it is that we do. And this is what, it was just a very hard cold call to make, and so I went from that to like, hey, you literally have a job posted and I have a candidate, ready to go. Can we make this happen? And so I just liked how straightforward that it was. And so all those things jumped off the page to me right off the bat. And I really liked it right from the beginning.
Love that. And I think you're absolutely right compared to other sales jobs like medical device sales or whatever. There's certain things you can say, you can't say. Financial wealth sales, same thing, like highly regulated sales jobs. Most sales jobs are very regulated. Recruitment is not. Like the only regulation I can think of is the how much money do you make? And that's a question that only certain states don't let you ask. And then internationally, there's like GDPR, like privacy concerns, but the US, there is no restraint at all about it.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that's part of what makes it so that way you can have such a big impact and help so many people and make a certain amount of money. But it's also partly why this industry gets a bad rap. Because you can use it for good or for evil. And some people are out there, just looking to close deals as quickly as possible and lying. And I don't see how you could ever regulate really this industry. So it's just inherent to it.
I think it regulates itself though, right? Like those people who do that, they don't last.
Yeah.
They can't make money. You can only get lucky so many times. It's actually not sustainable. Right? Because the word spreads, the information spreads so fast, like, because you're dealing with this organism of like a network, and like the network kind of lives on its own. So if you're bad, you're a virus, they'll recognize it and they'll tell everyone about it, and you won't. So I haven't seen somebody who's been awful survive.
Yeah.
They've just had to eventually pivot and do something else.
So
I think it just kind of regulates itself. I don't know.
I think it does too. And I think if you're going to try, the people who are really successful in this business, they always say this thing, you have to be money motivated, which is definitely true. You have to care about money to want to close deals, to have the motivation to keep doing this, but you also have to be altruistic in a way where you're not just trying to cram a deal down someone's throat that they don't want. Right. Especially like when you're closing a deal. I've heard a lot of people say a lot of wrong things just because they just want the commission at the end of the deal, and it's not a good fit for the company, or it's not a good fit for the candidate. So like, you have to have that mix of, you want the money, but you can also just be a good person and not lie to people. And there's no, like, to your point, there's no way to regulate that. It will just regulate itself, because the people who do lie and cut corners, they're not going to last in the business. And it is what it is.
Yeah. I've always seen that every time. I'm like, it's not sustainable. You know, when you lie to people, when you lie to candidates and clients, you'd rather want the other end of that, where it's like the good word of you spreads. And that's actually even more effective, where you've kind of done the right thing for yourself long-term, and you believe in yourself long-term, and you end up, you know, doing the right thing. And then more candidates actually talk about how great you are. And that's actually more profitable. So I think there's this invisible, like, altruistic, like, karmic force that actually encourages good behavior and penalizes bad behavior in recruitment specifically, because it's you're dealing with a very intangible thing, versus like, you could be a horrible salesperson and sell someone a great product, and then that'll be fine because the product is fine. But you can't do that in recruiting. Like, a bad job is a bad job. The person's not going to be like, this is a great job. It's not a great job. You shouldn't have taken that job order on, or whatever, you know. So I think it's unique because of the product that we're selling.
Yeah. And it also just makes me feel good about the world in general, because I think all of that is true, that the people who are honest and benevolent and, you know, really want to help people will rise to the top in this industry. And, you know, contrary to what I think some of the opinions of people on our business might be, the people who are fast talkers and try to be too slick for their own good, they wash out of the business. I heard someone say something a long time ago that stuck with me about this. Was they were closing a deal, and they said to this person, whether you decide to accept this offer or decline the offer, I will respect your decision either way.
Right.
And I say that to this day, but it's not just saying, you have to actually believe it. Like, you have to truly understand that it's their decision to make. They're the one doing the job, and you have to respect them no matter what they do. You know, I tell Isaac, who is my is the one of the recruiters on my team, you know, we're not here to really be like selling people, convincing people of really anything. We're here to be showing them there's this opportunity. Maybe you are aware of it, maybe not, most of the time not. Or to the companies, there's this candidate you haven't met. Let's see if you guys want to do this or not. If someone says no, I'm not going to be like, well, you should, you're wrong. You know, like that's kind of a losing battle. So.
Right. Yeah. And again, it's the recruiter's responsibility to show the candidate all angles, right? At the end of the day, I think a lot of candidates, especially if they're risk averse, that's where headhunters can make the biggest impact, is helping them rise up to the occasion. Because maybe on their own, they're too scared. But that's part of the joy of being a headhunter, is that you can be that change for them, because they weren't thinking about moving sometimes, right? You'll call them, they're like, I don't need to move. But then you have a conversation, you're like, but you don't have it that great. You're being underpaid by like $30,000. And then they don't even know that. So I think it's really fun when you get to be that person to educate them and be like, no, you really need to think about your career, because these are things that you don't even know are happening.
Yeah.
You're sort of a stick, right?
Yeah. And so that's like the counterpoint, is like, we are here to influence people and help them. It's not as if there's no level of influencing people in the job, but it's not about trying to convince them of something that's incorrect. It's right. Just about like showing them information that they maybe didn't have before. And that's the really fun part of this job. When something like you just described happens, is you call someone, hey, I'm a recruiter, I have a job. Hey, I'm not really interested. Okay, you know, I understand, I'm about to hang up, but not sure if this makes a difference, but it does pay $150,000 a year and is fully remote. And then they're like, whoa, I'm making 110 and let's talk. So yeah, you can do that too.
Yeah, because sometimes these conversations, you end up in a point where you have a further conversation, they're fine. Everything really is good. But you're like, okay, yeah, you shouldn't leave. Right? Or you have a conversation that's like, actually, you might think everything's perfect, but here are some areas that could be improved if you left. Right? So like the candidates themselves don't even really know, but that's why experts, professional experts like recruiters, can come in and really, that's why we exist and why candidates want to use recruiters, right? It's not like we just exist because the client wants us to. Candidates also are like, hey, if you go find a good recruiter, that's someone you want to know. That's someone that can really help you, right?
Yeah, and I think the candidates and the clients who are really savvy, when you call them, even if you cold call them, they'll basically like pump you for information.
Yeah,
which is good. Like I'm fine with that. They want to know, who are you recruiting for? What does it pay? I'm not really looking right now, but thanks for the info. Like, okay, whatever. Like that's part of the game that we're playing. The ones where it's like, you're a recruiter, no thanks, they immediately hang up on you. It's like, I have a lot of information that you might be interested in, especially if you're a client. Like, I probably walk through 2 or 3 manufacturing plants a month. I try to do a lot of site visits and work locally because in my line of recruitment, people want to know what the plant is like. Is it hot and dirty and sweaty and full of pollution, or is it brand new, just been built, full of automation and, clean? So I need to see the places. But my point is, sometimes I'll cold call someone and they're a direct competitor to a company that I just walked through their plant a month ago. I have a lot of information about what their competitors are doing. And you have to, you have to keep confidential things confidential, but there's a lot more value in using a recruiter than just like, finding new candidates.
Yeah. And I think a lot with clients and candidates, they have a sense of if you are legit or not.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot to that. There's a lot that we could talk about as far as like, there's specific tactical things that, we can do about getting high activity. And then there's certain things that are almost like philosophical things that you have to have. So, starting there, right? So I think that the people who are really super ultra successful in this business, you have to be insanely highly motivated, and that motivation has to come from somewhere. And I think that a lot of people who have that, they have like some type of a chip on their shoulder as to what they're trying to accomplish and why. And that's what drives you through the really hard times. So for example, I'm reading this book right now by Robert Herjavec. He's one of the sharks on Shark Tank. He talks about how his parents came here from Croatia. And when he was like 7 or 8 years old, English was his second language, Serbian or Croatian, whatever the other language was his first language. And kids would make fun of him because he had a funny accent and they were poor and he didn't have the right clothes and whatever. And he talks about in the book that like 25 years after that, he's building his business, thinking back to that time, like that's what drove him to be like, I'm going to show those kids, like I wasn't the poor, they treat him like a loser, like I'm not what you thought I was then. I think it's hard to, it's not really actionable advice. Like I can't tell you go manufacture like some type of a motivation, but it doesn't matter what it is. If it's just like, hey, I live in a 2-bedroom apartment and I want to have a big house, then that's your motivation. If it's, I have kids and I want more for them, then that's your motivation. But you have to have something. I mean, I've even read, some of your posts where you talk about like, you're working in a Chinese food restaurant, your parents' restaurant. And like, the way I interpreted it was like, when you got into this business, you were like, I have no backup plan. It's not like other people who, they can just go back, move into their parents' house. Like if it's between make this next cold call or go back to work in the restaurant, I'm making the next cold call. And so, yeah, I think having that type of a mindset, just, you got to have something like that to push through.
Right. So mindset. And you mentioned also earlier, there are some tactical things. And do you think working at the agency you worked at, working for someone else is a great way to learn those tactics? Or like, what do you think is the best way to strengthen your tactical advantage?
Mm-hmm. So I think the tactical stuff, like you have to have high activity. And that's why, like, you look at the Robert Halfs of the world or the biggest staffing firms, they always get knocked because people don't like metrics. Well, there's a reason why they have those metrics, because they know that if you're making a lot of calls, you're going to make more placements, especially when you're in the beginning time. You can't be afraid of dialing and emailing and calling and staying in touch with people. So, you got to just have a really high activity, work really hard. It's hard work is like the short answer to this. Like, I think right now it's very trendy to be like, hey, if you just post online, then you're going to bill $1 million. Or if you just focus on your health, then you're going to make $1 million. If you focus on your mental health, you're going to, like, you have to do all of the things together, but really the most important thing is you have to work incredibly hard. You have to just, keep pushing through, and there's no silver bullet to this thing called recruitment.
Ain't that the truth? So I'm curious, what actually motivated you to start your own recruiting firm?
So I had been an agency for 5 years. I was successful. I made 5 President's Clubs. Part of it was like, it was just kind of like the next thing to do. It just made sense for me to, try to conquer the next frontier or whatever that might be. But then the other thing was like, I wanted to build and grow something where I had full autonomy over who are we going to hire? How are we going to train them? Who is doing a good job? Who is not doing a good job? What is our training like? What is our culture like? What is our philosophy like? I also wanted to build something that was 100% exclusive to manufacturing, which is what I do now. Because I worked for a big agency where we had all different divisions of different things. And I was really the only guy doing manufacturing recruitment. So I wanted to be really hyper niched. The other thing was, I think that it's hard to build something in someone else's business. I mean, of the 5 years that I was there, we really never, I was a solo perm guy running a full desk the entire time. I split a few deals with like other offices. We had, 1 or 2 perm people that came and went out of our office, but it was really just all me the whole time, which I think, for some people starting off in this business, maybe it's not the best way because it's really hard. But for me, I didn't know any different. Like, I just knew that you have to make cold calls and get clients, and you have to get candidates. You got to somehow do both. And that's what you're doing when you have a business. So it does kind of get to a point where it's like, I don't know how much I need this company anymore. I'm already doing it. I already built it from scratch once. The other thing for me was when I first started an agency, I started at an office where they had never done perm in that office. They were wanting to grow something, build it from scratch. So I had already done that. I had already, took something from ice cold and built it into a desk where it basically had recurring revenue. And I was recruiting and living in like a small territory in Western Massachusetts where I grew up. There's like 2 hours west of Boston. There really isn't that much there. So I wanted to, move somewhere, which I did. I moved to Charlotte. That was bigger, had more opportunity for more clients and all of that stuff. And I knew that if I'd done it in a tiny territory, I could probably do it again in a bigger territory. And so that was that.
I love that. In fact, I think entrepreneurship is really critical and is a core trait of what a lot of top pillars have. And out of curiosity, what would you say are some tips that you have for recruiters that are looking to up their game and become successful?
Yeah, I think going into this, like, know your reasons for going into it, first of all, because I'll talk to people who, will say, I'm thinking about starting my own recruiting agency, but I've never done any recruiting before and I've never done any sales before. And I'll say, well, why do you want this business? And they'll say, well, I want something where I can work from home and I want something where I can make a ton of money because I hear you make a lot of money in this business. Well, I would say those are probably not great reasons to start a business in recruiting because this job is really, really hard. You have to understand that it's going to be hard. And if you're, trying to start a business without ever having worked in this industry before, it's going to be an uphill climb. I mean, there's a lot of resources you can use online. I would suggest those to people. Like, I would say follow someone like you, like follow someone like Don who's done it, and try and go out, seek as much information as out there, different books and different resources on recruiting, resources on sales. Try to learn as much as you can. Try to get close to other people who are doing what you want to do, big billers. And you're not going to really do that if you just start your own business. I would suggest to most people that you work in agency recruiting for a little while, because you're going to make mistakes and you're probably better off making mistakes on a company's dime where when you screw up, they're there to, number one, tell you that you screwed up because you might not even know that you did. They're there to put you back on track, point you in the right direction. They're to have people there that you can learn from. So I would try doing some of that stuff before you just start your own business. But then, whether you're in your own business or in an agency, I think what, you got to just do is have a really high amount of activity and work really hard. You got to make a ton of calls. You got to, sometimes you got to work on weekends. You got to make, probably work like 40, 50, 60 hours a week, I would say, in your first couple of years.
Yep.
and just grind it out. And then it will get easier over time. You know, by the time you do that after a year or two, you'll get better and better at it and get more efficient at it. But you got to just buckle up for a hard ride, because it won't be the easiest thing you've ever done.
Yes, I think that's really realistic, tangible, and astute advice.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was in agency for 5 years before I went solo. So I had thought about trying to go solo earlier, but I knew I wasn't really ready. And I also knew that I didn't have my financial house in order the way that I wanted to. Because I was planning out, like, what if I don't make any money for the first 3 months, 6 months, 12 months? Like, how long can we last?
Yep.
Because you just don't know. You know, when you start a business, you just don't know what's going to happen. So yeah, you have to have everything kind of lined up before you go solo.
That's great advice again, and thank you so much for sharing all of these tips. Where can people find you if they want to follow your journey and be kept up to date with what Carnegie Search is up to?
On LinkedIn, you can follow me on LinkedIn. CarnegieSearch.com is our website. For the most part, I post a lot on LinkedIn, so you can follow some of my stuff there, or on our website.
Great. Well, thanks again for all your time and keen advice for our listeners. Thanks, Mike.